Trapped in total darkness, one wrong step meant instant death. These are the most horrific, deadly falls in the world's most unforgiving caves that would send shivers down your spine. Let us dive into details. The 1952 Laverna Cave. Tragedy, deep within the limestone heart of the French Pyrenees, is a large and mysterious cave diver known as Laverna. It is part of the Pierre Saint-Martin cave system, a vast underground realm created by nature over millions of years. While its natural majesty is astonishing, it was the story of a perilous trip in 1952 that cemented this cave's place in the history of human discovery and tragedy. The story began a year before, in 1951, when three pioneering explorers, Haroun Tazieff, Marcel Lubin, and Georges Lepineur, set out on a mission to push the boundaries of human discovery beneath the Earth's surface. This was not just a caving expedition, it was a scientific adventure. Armed with ropes, film cameras, and sheer tenacity, they set out to investigate and capture one of the deepest chasms ever discovered. That year, Tazieff captured Georges Lepineur's courageous plunge down a tight vertical shaft, guided by ropes. This shaft, later dubbed the Gouffre Lepineur in his honor, fell 356 meters straight down, far into the grassy plains where Basque shepherds grazed their sheep. At the time, it was regarded as the deepest vertical shaft known to man. The feat was monumental. It put the Pierre Saint-Martin Massif at the forefront, but no one could have predicted the carnage that followed. Just 1 year later, in the summer of 1952, the team returned, this time with more ambition, better equipment, and a stronger determination to delve further into the depths. Marcel Lubens, a great engineer and dedicated speleologist, was at the heart of this expedition. Calm under pressure and highly regarded, he was the type of man others trusted with their own lives. But fate had different intentions. On August 14, 1952, a calamity occurred. As the team prepared to pull Lubens up to the surface, after hours of frigid darkness in the cave, the line that held him snapped barely 15 meters above the bottom. In a moment, the adventurer fell to the cave floor. The blow crushed his jaw, fractured his spine, and rendered him comatose. A stillness fell over the squad, which no underground echo could break. Their comrade and teammate were broken in the depths of the earth. What followed was a race against the clock unlike any other. Lubens was not alone, even deep beneath. His companions, Occhialini, Labayri, and Tazieff, refused to desert him. They kept communication with the surface by stringing a flimsy telephone line through their cables and coordinated an urgent rescue mission. As the hours passed, a gathering audience gathered above. Military helicopters circled, French and international media arrived in waves, and the entire country appeared to be holding its breath. For 30 stressful hours, the rescue mission proceeded with steadfast conviction. A stretcher was cautiously lowered into the abyss, accompanied by Dr. Meret, a physician who volunteered for the potentially fatal drop. When he approached the injured adventurer, hope flickered. Though unconscious, Lubens clung to life. Dr. Meret made a risky decision. He would try a blood transfusion right there in the Earth's belly, trying to stabilize Lubens for the ascent. But the challenges were enormous. The shaft's rough, thin walls made lifting a stretcher almost impossible without bashing it against the sides. Lion scouts offered to descend and aid, creating a human lifeline in the darkness. They set up 240 meters of rope ladders and worked tirelessly to guide the stretcher uphill. It was a spectacle of incredible bravery and cooperation, driven by love, devotion, and an unwillingness to give up. But as soon as hope began to surge with the morning light above the earth, darkness took its place. Marcel Lubens died a few minutes after receiving the transfusion. His buddies, grieving and fatigued, made a heartbreaking decision. They were unable to get his body to the surface, so they buried him right there in the cave. For 2 years, Lubens was entombed in the earth he had hoped to investigate. Despite the sadness, the narrative of Marcel Lubens and the Laverna Cave became a symbol of fearless discovery rather than failure, of camaraderie in the face of peril, of the human spirit's yearning to explore the unknown, even if it means paying the ultimate price. Today, Laverna is more than just a geological marvel. It is a tribute to bravery, a lonely cathedral beneath the mountains, where echoes still tell of a man who dared to delve deeper. Curtain Pot Incident. Curtain Pot is one of the Yorkshire Dales' many hidden entrances into the earth, located beneath the wind-beaten slopes of Fountains Fell near Settle. A deep, narrow cave opening leading into an unmapped and hazardous network of subterranean channels, it serves as both a siren call and a test of will for cave divers. On June 1st, 2019, it was the location of a sad event that shocked the caving community to its foundation. Harry Hesketh, a seasoned and respected cave diver with years of expertise, went on an expedition into Curtain Pot with 2 others. They were exploring the cave as part of a recreational trip, drawn by the mystery and challenge of the largely unknown underground labyrinth. However, what began as an ordinary descent suddenly became a nightmare. Harry plunged over 20 feet, about 6 meters, into the cave, landing in a tiny and difficult-to-access region. The alert was promptly sounded, resulting in one of the greatest cave rescue missions in modern British history. The plea for assistance summoned nearly 100 rescue personnel, including volunteers from the Cave Rescue Organization, the Upper Wharfdale Fell Rescue Association, the Swaledale Mountain Rescue Team, and the Bradford Pothole Club. These were not amateurs. They were among the most experienced cave rescuers in the country. They responded quickly and cooperatively, mobilizing specialist teams and equipment under harsh physical conditions. The conditions inside Curtain Pot were harsh. Tight squeezes, precipitous drops, and unclear tunnels made every move a calculated risk. The cave had not been completely explored, so the rescuers had to feel their way forward, inch by painful inch in pitch darkness, freezing temperatures, and moist, cramped circumstances. Every step toward Harry was difficult to take. For 17 exhausting hours, the teams worked in shifts, traversing a maze of limestone and steep slopes, while working in tight vertical tunnels, barely wide enough to turn around in. Communication was challenging. Equipment had to be lowered and moved around tight corners. Medics, engineers, and experienced cave divers all worked together in a frantic attempt to reach Harry and stabilize him. For those who knew him, Harry was more than just another casualty. He was one of their own. His reputation as a skillful and cautious explorer made his fall even more surprising. As the hours passed, his chances of survival dwindled. The natural design of the cave, with its harsh inaccessibility, was just as dangerous as the ticking clock. Despite the valiant and painstaking efforts of the rescue teams, Harry Hesketh died from his injuries before he could be extricated. The loss struck hard. Volunteers who had toiled through the night returned fatigued, physically and emotionally spent, bearing the heavy load of a failed mission, not due to a lack of effort, but because nature had conspired against them. An inquiry later determined that Harry's death was an accident, recognizing the inherent dangers of cave exploration and the catastrophic outcomes that even the most accomplished adventurers can confront. The tragedy spurred broader debate about the dangers of unmapped cave networks and the necessity for updated surveys and safety precautions, particularly in regions as unpredictable as Curtain Pot. Despite the tragic circumstances, the episode highlighted something fundamentally human. Nearly 100 strangers, united by courage, solidarity, and a shared enthusiasm for exploration, risked everything to save a fellow adventurer. They braved darkness, fear, and tiredness, pushed themselves to their limits in a location where few would dare to go. Harry Hesketh's story is not only a somber reminder of the dangers lurking beneath the surface, but it is also a monument to the caving community's perseverance and fraternity. Curtain Pot still stands, silently reflecting the legacy of a man who loved the land beneath his feet and the incredible community that sacrificed everything to bring him home. Quuea de Alpazad, L'incident. On March 15, 2004, 6 expert British cave divers ventured into the Quuea de Alpazad, located in Mexico's remote Huasteca region. Members of the Combined Services Caving Association, they were all current or former British Armed Forces members who had been taught, disciplined, and experienced in traversing underground labyrinths. Their mission was straightforward: travel to Camp 1, complete survey work, and then return. The weather was moist but not threatening, and the team had been researching the cave system for years. They were aware of the flood hazards and had prepared by bringing radios, food, and emergency supplies. However, nothing could have prepared them for what happened next. By March 17th, tragedy had hit. Heavy rain had flooded the entrance, trapping them inside with rising water. The surface crew alerted them over the radio, and the men stayed calm at first. They were trained to deal with delays. But as the days went by, the cave became unfriendly. The water continued rising, the air became moist, sleep became uneasy. Food rations were reduced to the absolute minimum. The muscles weakened. Fear crept in. On March 23rd, the team had been stranded for more than a week. The air reeked of perspiration and stale wetness. Anxiety increased as radio communication became less regular. Outside, Mexican rescue forces attempted to assist, but the submerged tunnel required professional divers, which only Britain could supply. Eventually, British rescuers Rick Stanton and Jason Mallinson arrived. On March 25th, they made their move. The flooded tunnels were dark, small, and dangerous. After hours of trudging through water and rock, they arrived at Camp 1. The captive soldiers were taken out one by one, through submerged hallways in a harrowing, breath-holding escape. After 9 hard hours, the entire squad emerged, alive. But the nightmare had not ended. As the cameras flashed and officials closed in, the situation became political. The Mexican government detained the team due to concerns about their military ties and radon equipment. Accusations flew. Were they spies? Are there any illegal miners? Despite the lack of evidence of misconduct, the cave divers were interviewed, charged with not having licenses, and expelled from Mexico. An international controversy has started. Back in the UK, some praise them as heroes, while others question their decisions. The storm passed, but for the 6 men who had braved deep darkness and global scrutiny, the scars of Quuea de Alpazad would never really heal. The New River Cave incident, it was January 18, 1980, a harsh winter evening in Giles County, Virginia. Laura Sherback, her husband, and a few pals set out with excitement in their eyes and camping gear in tow. Their goal is New River Cave. It had long been a favorite destination for amateur cave divers due to its twisting limestone passageways and breathtaking natural structures. There were no ropes or steep climbs, only crawling, climbing, and maneuvering through nature's subterranean masterpiece. To the group, it seemed like the ideal place to spend the night underground. However, caves have a way of drawing people in with their beauty, only to remind them how brutal they are. As the group entered the cave at about 7 p.m., the atmosphere was electric with excitement. They pushed deeper into the damp, echoing passageways, cold air biting at their skin, boots scraping against centuries-old rock. For 2,000 feet, it was the kind of adventure they were looking for. Tight hallways, echoing chuckles, and the thrill of the unknown. Then they came to a narrow stretch known as the blowhole. The blowhole was a section where the floor became slippery and dangerous. Centuries of dripping water had sculpted out weird, beautiful designs in the limestone, but it also left razor-sharp edges and uneven ground. Laura, enthusiastic and unskilled, tried to climb through this portion. Her hands and feet braced against the moist, sloped rock as she hoisted herself up. But one fateful moment, her boots slipped. She lost control. Time appeared to slow as her body fell only a few feet, but it was enough. Beneath her, a sharp limestone formation jutted from the cave floor like a blade. She landed forcefully with her legs stretched apart. The sharp rock pierced her lower abdomen with devastating power. A horrible thump rang through the cave, followed by a cry that would haunt the tunnels forever. Laura slumped in agony, blood flowing through her garments as her body convulsed with pain. The fall had torn through sensitive tissue in her pelvic and vaginal region. The destruction was severe. Her friends ran to her side, peeling back her clothing to inspect the injury, and were faced with a horrible sight. Shredded flesh, exposed muscle, and a swiftly spreading pool of blood. Shock began to take hold. Laura's limbs twitched violently. Her breathing came in short, irregular gasps. Her skin became pallid. The cold of the cave began to fight against her weakening body, forcing her into hypothermia. Her friends pulled off her wet clothes and placed her into a sleeping bag, hoping to keep what little body heat remained. 2 of them dashed into the swirling darkness, determined to reach the surface and shout for assistance. Once outside, fear set in. The men had taken detours, slipped through twists and dead ends. They could not remember the exact route back to Laura. Each tunnel looked the same. Minutes turned into hours. Laura's condition deteriorated once she returned underground. Her pulse became weaker. Her body began to shut down due to blood loss. Her once harsh shouts faded to whispers, then silence. The Giles County Rescue Squad finally received word at 11 p.m. Expert cave divers from the VPI Grotto were brought in. They recognized the cave. However, they made slow progress. They crawled, climbed, and squeezed their way through the dangerous cave, knowing that each passing minute was a risk to Laura's life. When they arrived, she was nearly unconscious. Her body became ice cold, and her lips turned blue. Severe hypovolemic shock had developed. Her organs were failing one by one. There was not time to squander. They cleaned her wounds and administered fluids into her veins. Then came the hardest part, getting her out. She was placed in a Stokes litter, which is a stretcher built for tough rescues. But getting her out required squeezing through jagged passageways, crawling over rocks, and transferring her corpse hand to hand like a fragile glass sculpture. Every bump and jostle sent new waves of excruciating pain across her body. Her eyesight was clouded. She slipped in and out of consciousness, locked in a nightmare she could not shake. At one point, the rescuers fashioned a human conveyor line by lying flat in a column to get her through a crawlway that was too narrow for standing. Laura was finally rescued from the cave's cold hold at 5 a.m., 9 hours after she had fallen. She was taken to Montgomery County Hospital, where a trauma team was ready. The injuries were horrific: internal injury, extensive blood loss, and ripped tissue. But she was alive. The horror of that night would never leave her. All from a slip, a fall of just a few feet. But that is the danger of caves. Their beauty hides blades, their silence hides screams, and one wrong move can turn wonder into trauma. This story is a chilling reminder. Underground nature shows no mercy. Parisburg Cave Accident. In January 2024, a horrible event occurred deep in the forest outside Parisburg, Virginia. Autumn Nicole Draper, a 38-year-old Fairlawn resident, died after falling into a lonely cave. On January 12th, the Giles County Sheriff's Office received a scary 911 call. Autumn had fallen nearly 100 feet into the depths of a cave. The setting was tough, the terrain was harsh, and every second counted. Within minutes, an emergency response was launched. The Selco Emergency Response Unit collaborated with the highly skilled Blacksburg Rescue Squad's Technical Rescue Cave Unit. These were experts educated to navigate the most dangerous underground settings, risking their own lives to save others. As daylight went and temperatures dipped, the team proceeded into the cave, weighed down by a sense of urgency and hope. Despite their brave and quick actions, the conclusion was devastating. Autumn Draper was pronounced dead at the spot, as her injuries were too serious to survive. The incident caused ripples of anguish throughout the community. Autumn's friends and family remembered her not only for the tragedy that took her life, but also for the brightness and energy she brought to those around her. The rescue teams, despite being unable to change the outcome, were praised for their bravery and perseverance under harsh conditions. The Parisburg Cave event serves as a sobering reminder of the hidden perils lurking beneath the Earth's surface, as well as the heroic humans who respond when disaster strikes. It also serves as a reminder of how fragile life is and how quickly things may change. This terrible story demonstrates the courage of first responders and the legacy of a life taken far too soon.
Imagine being trapped 985 feet below the ocean's surface, where one wrong move could mean instant death. Deep-sea saturation divers risk their lives in extreme conditions, repairing structures in the crushing darkness. But when things go wrong at these depths, survival is nearly impossible. From deadly equipment failures to bone-chilling escapes, these underwater disasters will leave you breathless. Stay tuned as we uncover 5 terrifying deep-sea accidents that will haunt your nightmares. BIF Dolphin Accident. On the frigid, windswept waters of the North Sea, where the relentless tides meet the steel of oil rigs, a team of 6 experienced divers embarked on what should have been another routine operation. It was the early morning hours of Saturday, November 5th, 1983, at 4 a.m. to be exact, when these men, seasoned professionals, worked to maintain the Frigg gas field in the Norwegian sector. The men were part of an elite diving crew, specialists in deep-sea operations, accustomed to working in extreme conditions at depths where the human body was pushed to its very limits. The team inside the diving chamber system on the rig's deck consisted of 4 divers: Roy P. Lucas, Edwin Arthur Coward, and Truls Hellevik. Bjørg Giæver Bergersen. They were assisted by 2 dive tenders, often referred to as drivers, William Crammond and Martin Saunders. The tender's role was to ensure the diving bell and decompression chambers were properly secured and maintained. The system was complex yet well practiced. At the time of the accident, decompression chambers 1 and 2 were linked by a short passage, known as a trunk, to a 3rd chamber, which was unused. The diving bell had just been lifted from the depths, carrying Bergersen and Hellevik, who had completed their deep-sea dive. Inside the chambers, Coward and Lucas were resting at an immense pressure of 9 atmospheres, their bodies slowly acclimating back to surface conditions to prevent decompression sickness. As per standard procedure, Bergersen and Hellevik left their wet diving gear in the trunk before climbing through to Chamber 1. Everything proceeded as planned, with Crammond and Saunders securing the bell to the chambers. It was a meticulous process, one they had performed countless times before. The men worked efficiently, knowing that each step was crucial in ensuring the safety of their fellow divers. But that morning, something went horribly wrong. As Crammond and Saunders were preparing to depart, a fatal oversight occurred. The bell was not properly sealed off from the decompression chambers before they began their ascent. Within seconds, disaster struck. The chambers, still pressurized at 9 atmospheres, were suddenly exposed to the outside environment, just 1 atmosphere. The result was an immediate and catastrophic decompression event. The air inside the chambers erupted outward with violent force, creating an explosive decompression that no human body could withstand. For those inside, death was instantaneous and gruesome beyond comprehension. The nitrogen dissolved in their blood expanded rapidly, forming bubbles throughout their circulatory systems. Their internal organs ruptured as gases boiled within them. Coward, Lucas, and Bergerson were killed almost immediately, their bodies torn apart from the inside. The rapid depressurization was not just lethal, it was nightmarish. But the fate of Truls Hellevik was even more horrifying. The decompression force was so immense that Hellevik's entire body was sucked through a small opening in the chamber, no wider than a dinner plate. The pressure differential ejected his internal organs violently, some found strewn across the rig's deck. The sheer force of the event left rescuers in a state of shock and disbelief as they bore witness to a horror few could ever imagine. Meanwhile, one of the divers in the Bell, who had not yet entered the chambers, was also killed in the sudden decompression, while another miraculously survived, albeit with severe trauma from the event. The accident sent shockwaves through the offshore diving industry. A full investigation was launched, uncovering the chain of events that had led to such an unprecedented catastrophe. The primary cause was traced back to the failure to properly seal off the diving bell before the ascent began, a mistake that would prove fatal for almost everyone inside the chamber system. In the wake of the tragedy, changes were implemented across the commercial diving industry. Stricter protocols for decompression procedures were enforced, and new safety mechanisms were developed to prevent such accidents from happening again. Engineers redesigned the sealing systems of diving chambers, ensuring that such an error could never occur so easily again. BIBBY Topaz Accident. The BIBBY Topaz incident is one of the most incredible survival stories in commercial diving. In 2012, deep beneath the North Sea, divers like Chris Lemons put their lives at risk to maintain critical oil and gas infrastructure. Chris, a skilled saturation diver, was performing routine subsea maintenance when the situation turned deadly. Working from the BIBBY Topaz, a diving support vessel with a dynamic positioning system to keep it steady, Chris and his team relied on the ship for air, communication, and warmth. But that day, disaster struck. While Chris was underwater, the vessel's dynamic positioning system malfunctioned, causing it to drift 620 feet off course, far from its intended position. The movement of the ship had immediate and dire consequences. As the vessel drifted, the umbilical cord that tethered Chris to his lifeline above became entangled and stretched to its limit. In an instant, the cord snapped free from his suit, severing his supply of air, hot water, and communications. Trapped more than 300 feet below the surface, in absolute darkness, with nothing but his emergency air supply, Chris found himself in a fight against time. The severity of the situation was undeniable. At that depth, the water was pitch black, freezing, and silent. Even seasoned divers train for emergencies like this, though they hope never to encounter one. Realizing his danger, Chris knew survival relied on staying calm. With no communication, no light, and air running out, he had no choice but to free himself from the structure and try to find safety. Back on the BIBBY Topaz, the dive team quickly recognized something was wrong. As the ship's position failed, alarms sounded, and the crew rushed to regain control.
Back in the stage, please. Leave everything there. Chris, Dave, back in the stage.
Engineers and divers worked urgently, knowing every second mattered for their colleagues' lives. On the seabed, Chris was alone. His only oxygen source was a limited emergency tank, far too little to last until rescue. Rapid ascents at this depth are deadly due to decompression risks, so swimming to the surface was not an option. His only hope was for his team to find him quickly. The crew aboard the BIBBY Topaz had managed to stabilize the ship, and divers in the support bell were quickly dispatched to locate Chris. Time was critical, as without an external air supply, he had only minutes before hypoxia would cause unconsciousness. Miraculously, they found him on the seafloor, motionless. The lead diver pulled him toward the diving bell, where medical aid awaited. What followed was a frantic attempt to revive a man who, by all accounts, had already drowned. When Chris was finally back in the bell, over 40 minutes had passed since he lost air. Typically, this level of oxygen deprivation would be fatal. However, the freezing temperatures of the North Sea had slowed his metabolism, allowing his body to survive with minimal oxygen. His vital organs entered a state of suspension, buying enough time for the divers to reach him before irreversible damage occurred. Against all odds, Chris Lemons survived as he was slowly brought back to normal pressure. He regained consciousness with no lasting harm, leaving his story as one of the most remarkable survival tales in commercial diving history. The BIBBY Topaz and its operators took the incident as a stark lesson. Rake Accident. The North Sea is an unforgiving place, stretching between the coastlines of the United Kingdom and Norway. Its waters are icy, dark, and known for their merciless temperament. In August 1979, a tragedy unfolded beneath those waves, one that would shake the entire commercial diving industry to its core. It was known as the Rake Accident, and it would claim the lives of two skilled and experienced divers, Richard Walker and and Victor Guiel. Walker and Guiel were both seasoned divers, professionals who had spent years honing their craft. They were part of a team working on an oil rig, a floating island of steel and machinery in the middle of the sea. Their job, like that of many commercial divers, was both dangerous and vital, performing maintenance and repairs on the underwater infrastructure that kept the oil industry running. On that fateful day, they prepared to enter the depths inside a diving bell, a small pressurized capsule designed to transport divers from the safety of the surface to the crushing pressures of the deep. The bell was attached to the MS Rake, a support vessel that assisted in the oil rig's operations. Once inside the bell, Walker and Guiel donned their suits, checked their equipment, and waited for the descent. The lift wire, a thick steel cable that connected the bell to the ship, was their lifeline, carrying them down to a depth of 525 feet, where they would perform their work. But something went terribly wrong. Without warning, the lift wire that held the diving bell in place suddenly failed. In an instant, the bell was cut off from the ship above, severing the connection that provided them with electricity, heat, and a way to return to the surface. The bell, now an isolated chamber at the bottom of the sea, became a death trap. Panic must have surged through their veins, but as professionals, Walker and Guiel would have known the dangers that came with their line of work. They would have fought against the creeping dread and focused on survival, on using every ounce of their training to last long enough for a rescue. Their suits offered limited insulation against the bone-chilling cold of the deep, but without heat, hypothermia was a certainty. On the surface, a desperate rescue mission was launched. The oil rigging company knew that time was of the essence. Every passing minute brought the divers closer to the limits of human endurance. Engineers and crew members scrambled to devise a way to retrieve the stranded bell. But the sheer depth made things even more complicated. Retrieving a diving bell from over 500 feet below the surface was no small feat. It would take careful coordination, precise execution, and most of all, time. But time was the one thing Walker and Guiel did not have. As the hours stretched on, the temperature inside the bell continued to drop. Without electricity, the small space that had once been a controlled environment became a frozen tomb. The men would have huddled together, trying to conserve body heat, their breaths misting in the freezing air. However, the cold was relentless. Nearly 24 hours after the accident, the rig's crew finally succeeded in pulling the diving bell back to the surface. The moment it broke through the water's surface, the rescuers rushed to open the hatch, hoping against hope that they had made it in time. But inside, there was only silence. Richard Walker and Victor Guiel had succumbed to hypothermia. Their deaths sent shockwaves through the commercial diving community. The Rake accident became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of the dangers that deep-sea divers face every time they enter the water. It forced the industry to reevaluate its safety protocols, leading to changes in how diving bells were maintained, how lift wires were inspected, and how emergency procedures were handled. The Caribbean diving disaster. For the past 8 months, Christopher had been working as a commercial diver for an oil and gas company tasked with maintaining underwater pipelines. His daily routine was a familiar one: gearing up, checking his equipment, and descending into the deep, where his world was reduced to the cold embrace of steel, water, and silence. It was demanding work, but he had mastered it. He trusted his crew, and they trusted him. But on February 25, 2022, everything would take a drastic turn. The assignment came without warning. A long, dormant pipeline berth needed repairs. The structure was massive, its U-shaped base stretching 365 meters at a depth of 18 meters, with both ends rising above the water's surface. To prevent flooding, one end had been sealed years ago with a large inflatable plug inside an air chamber. Now, Christopher and his 4 teammates, Kazim, Yusuf, and 2 others, were tasked with extracting the plug and reactivating the system. Upon reaching the submerged air pocket, they climbed onto a narrow ledge, removed their heavy gear, and started working. It was supposed to be just another routine operation, but the moment the seal was broken, everything unraveled. However, the sudden collision of low-pressure air within the pipeline and the higher pressure in the chamber created an invisible force of terrifying power. In an instant, the pipeline turned into a monstrous vacuum, pulling everything inside: water, equipment, and, most horrifyingly, all 5 divers.
Pitch blackness engulfed them. Disoriented and struggling to breathe, they found themselves wedged inside the pipe, squeezed into a space barely 75 centimeters wide. Panic gripped them. Kazim was the first to scream. Christopher, landing beside him, tried to process their surroundings.
Somewhere further down, muffled cries signaled that the others were still alive. Fighting through the terror, they started crawling toward the voices, inching forward in the suffocating darkness. Eventually, they regrouped, but any sense of relief was short-lived.
God, everything all right with you? No. Any island break?
The injury was devastating. Crawling through the confined space was already grueling. Now, with one of them seriously hurt, their movement would be slow. The air pocket provided a temporary lifeline, but they all understood the grim reality. The oxygen would not last forever. Their only option was to press forward. But the burning question remained. Was there even a way out? With no other choice, they devised a way to move, each man bracing his feet against the shoulders of the one behind him and pushing forward in unison. It was painstaking, exhausting, and torturous for Yusuf. Then, an even greater horror revealed itself. Christopher, leading the way, suddenly hit a fully flooded section of the pipeline. No one knew how far the submerged portion extended. There was no guarantee another air pocket lay ahead. To dive forward might mean survival, or certain death. Yet staying put meant running out of oxygen. Some hesitated, paralyzed by fear. But Christopher and Kazim locked eyes, making the split-second decision. "We have to go," Christopher whispered, barely believing what he was saying. And with that, they plunged into the unknown. Every second underwater stretched into eternity. Their lungs burned, their muscles screamed for relief. Then, breakthrough. They surfaced in another air pocket. Gasping for breath, Christopher reached out blindly. His fingers touched something cold. Metal. He fumbled over it. Realization dawning. Scuba tanks. But in this nightmare, it was another challenge. Bulky equipment they had to drag through the suffocatingly tight pipeline. But one problem remained. They had no idea how much air was left in them. With no time to dwell on doubts, they pushed forward, inching through the steel labyrinth in a battle of sheer will. Hours passed. Every fiber of their being screamed for relief. Then, Kazim faltered. "I cannot," he gasped, terror gripping him. Christopher tried to rally him, but reality was unforgiving. If they stopped, they would perish. He had no choice. He had to keep moving. With the last reserves of his strength, Christopher forged ahead. His air was nearly gone, his vision blurred. Then his hand struck something, a bend in the pipe, leading upward, the way out. With a final, desperate push, he twisted, kicked, and forced himself through the opening. His lungs seized as he gasped, his vision swimming, but he had made it. He heard the voices of the rescuers. Relief surged through him, but his victory was short-lived. The moment he caught his breath, he turned to them, shouting, "My team! They are still inside." But they did nothing. Christopher pleaded, screamed, and even fought to dive back in himself. He was restrained and taken to the hospital, but even there, he tried to escape, anything to save his friends. Meanwhile, inside the pipe, the trapped divers pounded against the steel walls, their cries reaching the surface. Everyone could hear them. Nothing was done. No one moved. For 2 days, their desperate voices echoed through the pipeline. Then, silence. When the recovery effort finally began, it was too late. By February 27, 3 bodies were pulled from the pipeline. The last was recovered on March 3rd. But then, it was not the initial accident that killed them. It was the failure to act. Christopher survived, but with a burden no one should bear. He knew that if action had been taken immediately, his teammates could have been saved. Wage drill. 2. Accident. North Sea was an unforgiving place, its dark waters concealing countless dangers beneath the surface. But for Robert Edwin and Peter Holmes, seasoned commercial divers, they were among the elite few who could withstand the crushing depths and brutal conditions of deep sea diving. In 1975, while working on the Waga Drill 2 rig off the coast of Scotland, they embarked on what should have been a routine dive, a simple task of untangling some ropes caught along the rig at a depth of 394. Outfitted in their heavy-duty diving suits, Robert and Peter descended into the abyss, their world reduced to the murky glow of their headlamps and the rhythmic sound of their breathing. The North Sea loomed around them, a vast and silent entity, indifferent to their presence. The job was straightforward: locate the snag, cut the rope free, and return to the diving bell for decompression. As expected, they executed their task with precision. With the job done, they signaled to ascend. The divers moved toward the diving bell, a small pressurized chamber that served as their lifeline between the crushing depths and the surface world above. Once inside, they sealed the hatch, preparing for the long process of decompression. But as they settled in, something was wrong. A faint hissing sound filled the chamber, a gas leak. At first, they thought it might be minor, something they could control. But as the minutes passed, the urgency in their voices grew. The leak was not stopping. Worse, it was intensifying. They had no choice but to abandon the main chamber and retreat into a secondary, deeper chamber attached to the diving bell. It was a desperate move, but at that moment, it was their only option. The alternative, being exposed to the leaking gas, was far more perilous. On the surface, their dive supervisor, a man responsible for maintaining their safety, sprang into action. Realizing that the divers were in distress, he devised a solution. The best way to contain the leak was to feed helium into the chamber, which would help maintain pressure and block out the toxic gas. But in his haste, he made a critical miscalculation. Inside the chamber, Robert and Peter felt an immediate shift. The air seemed thinner, the pressure fluctuating in ways they had not expected. The problem was that the gauge inside their chamber was not functioning correctly. Their supervisor had no way of knowing how much helium was already present, unaware of the danger. He kept pumping more and more helium into the confined space, believing he was helping to stabilize it. But he was not stabilizing it, he was sealing their fate. The divers, already exhausted and disoriented from the initial crisis, struggled against this new threat. The sweltering heat clawed at them, their suits becoming suffocating prisons. Breathing became increasingly difficult. The helium-rich atmosphere, devoid of oxygen, left them gasping for air that no longer sustained them. Robert and Peter were trained to endure the harshest conditions, to maintain composure under pressure, but no amount of training could have prepared them for this. By the time their supervisor realized what had happened, it was too late. The chamber had become a death trap. Their colleagues on the surface could do nothing but watch in horror as their attempts to rectify the situation came too late. The tragic accident, a cruel twist of human error and mechanical failure, claimed the lives of the two divers. The deaths of Robert Edwin and Peter Holmes sent shockwaves through the commercial diving industry. The incident led to a re-evaluation of safety protocols, particularly regarding pressure gauge monitoring and helium management in diving chambers. It was a grim lesson learned at the highest cost. We are exploring two cave catastrophes today that plunged into sheer fear, tales of despair, darkness, and the terrible knowledge that some errors cannot be undone. The first one, a careless gamble, became a cramped nightmare in which flesh and rock fused to entangle its victim in a relentless stone vice. Panic set in, muscles tensed, and the air grew thin. Every second was a struggle against solid rock, an unreasonably hostile foe. However, the second, it is much worse. The story so painful, so slow, so agonizing that you will be out of breath just listening to it. A story of agony spanning countless hours, in which hope wavered, faded, and then viewers' discretion is not only advised, it is required. A field trip to Robber Baron Cave promised a day of exploration and geological discovery. Sarah Martinez stood out among the group at the age of 18, as she was the oldest and most eager to prove herself. The cave system beneath San Antonio had long been a local legend, a honeycomb of underground passages carved through limestone over thousands of years. The morning of March 8, 2018, began with excitement as 8 teenagers from Robert E. Lee High School's geology club gathered in the parking lot. The group arrived at the cave entrance in the middle of the morning after their geology teacher, Mr. Ramirez, had been talking about it for weeks. Robber Baron Cave was not just another hole in the ground. It was a geological marvel that had been painstakingly mapped by local speleologists over years of careful exploration. The cave system stretched approximately 2,700 feet, 823 meters, with passages so narrow that even experienced cave explorers found it difficult to navigate. Its intricate layout included multiple levels, squeeze passages, and small chambers that required careful maneuvering. The history and construction of the cave were explained to the pupils by Mr. Ramirez. The limestone formations, which were millions of years old, told a tale of tiny stalactites and stalagmites, formed natural sculptures in the shadows. Sarah discovered that she enjoyed the physical challenge as they made their way deeper into the cave. The narrow crawlways required them to move on their hands and knees, squeezing through areas that seemed impossible. Each tight squeeze turned into a personal success. The specific crack that would change everything looked unremarkable, a narrow opening in the limestone floor barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. Teenage dynamics played out in this underground world by her classmates, who witnessed a mixture of admiration and competitive energy filling the damp cave air. Unspoken challenges and silent competitions, Sarah's friends noticed her growing determination, and other students from other classes began subtly challenging her because they knew she was competitive and always wanted to prove herself. Although it appeared harmless, none of them were aware that it was a death trap. The U-shaped pattern of the crack grew increasingly smaller. Their conversation was interrupted by small remarks like, "I bet you cannot get through that tight spot." One of them went for her, and after a brief moment of hesitation, Sarah gave them a determined look and said, "I'm going to enjoy the look on their faces after making it through." Undeterred, she started to lower herself into the narrow opening, twisting her body to fit the confined turning space. Halfway down, Sarah realized she was stuck, not just temporarily wedged, but completely immobilized, the limestone walls pressing against her from all sides like an unforgiving stone vice. Her initial confidence turned to pure panic, and she could no longer see anything ahead that would give her hope. The passage narrowed even more, making it impossible for her to move. The first few moments seemed promising, as she felt the cool limestone against her skin and her helmet scraping against the rock. Her classmates' first attempts to help were futile. They grabbed her by the legs and tried pushing and pulling to create more space, but the limestone was unforgiving. The rock was not just tight, it was a living constraint. Her pelvis locked first, and her hip bones ground against the unyielding stone. The pain was more intense than usual, and tiny edges of limestone dug into her skin, creating 1,000 pinpoint pressures that felt like tiny knife wounds. They called Mr. Ramirez because they thought he would know how to get her out because of his experience. But as soon as he got to the scene, he realized they needed professional help because this was beyond their control. He looked at her and was shocked by what he saw. Sarah's right leg was twisted unnaturally, her knee bent at an angle that human anatomy never intended, and she was screaming in pain, making the endless wait for rescue even more difficult for everyone. After several hours, the initial rush of exhilaration gave way to fatigue and mounting fear. After 2 hours, Sarah was losing her willpower, and despite everyone else's best efforts, she remained still. The San Antonio Fire Department's technical rescue unit approached the extraction like a complicated surgical procedure. Her muscles started to cramp, and the unnatural position sent waves of pain shooting through her body. The cave, which had once been an exciting adventure, had now turned into a possible tomb. Although this was not their first cave rescue, each one was different. Robert Barron Cave had its own set of difficulties, including narrow passageways, intricate geological formations, and the possibility of extra rock movement. Their main tools were portable rock-cutting devices, made to cause the least amount of disturbance, inflatable rescue bags that could create microscopic space increases, and communication equipment that allowed them to stay in constant contact with the victim and team members in various positions. Hope was there for Sarah, but the struggle was far from over. Breathing became a calculated effort, requiring strategic muscle control with each exhale. Her chest was so tightly compressed that lung expansion became difficult, and her ribs felt like they were being slowly and methodically compressed. Rescuers knew time was running out, so they worked diligently for hours on end, moving with surgical precision with each cut and adjustment. Every millimeter of progress felt like a victory against an uncaring natural world. They used devices to see exactly where Sarah was stuck, making sure they would not cause more harm. Occasionally, a small rock would break away, giving them just enough space to adjust their grip. They moved like a single machine, each person knowing exactly what to do. They also continuously communicated and managed Sarah's psychological state. 3 rescuers formed a human chain, with one carefully grasping Sarah's feet. After a little over 9 hours, finally made the breakthrough they were looking for. Sarah, who had been immobilized for so long, was now able to move her body freed from the crushing grip of crevices. They took a deep breath and made one last collective pull. The tension was evident, but the crowd suddenly burst into cheers. After 11 excruciating hours, Sarah carefully made her way out of the crevice, her body scarred and beaten but amazingly free from the cave's deadly hold. After receiving first aid at the hospital, Sarah was sent home to rest and recuperate from her terrible experience. The cave remained unchanged, a silent witness to human vulnerability and resilience. For Sarah and her classmates, it was a day that would be remembered forever, a moment when adventure met its dangerous edge and human skill and determination prevailed. Sarah's face showed relief as she emerged into the bright sunlight. Her face was exhausted, shaken, but alive. The person in this second story was not as lucky as the first, which makes it especially tragic. This leads us to the gripping narrative of an exciting diving trip gone wrong in the seductive waters of Florida's Blue Spring State Park. The story entails friendship, passion, unforeseen difficulties, and a tragic conclusion that reveals the significant ramifications of diver readiness and safety regulations. You may find Blue Spring State Park, a fantastic park that is popular with tourists and provides a range of fun activities. Located to the west of Orange City, Florida, in the United States. Activities available to tourists include swimming, canoeing, scuba diving, kayaking, fishing, camping, hiking, and wildlife observation. The park's well-known spring, Volusia Blue Spring, is one of its most striking attractions. This spring is the biggest on the St. Johns River. It is notable for its consistently pleasant temperature of 73 degrees Fahrenheit, which attracts many Florida manatees. During the winter, about 102 million US gallons of water flow out of Blue Spring every day into the St. Johns River. The spring is 120 feet deep, but only those who have obtained official cave diving certification are allowed to descend that far. Open water certified divers can go as far as 60 feet when they encounter a large warning sign firmly affixed to the cave's entrance, urging them to heed the warning and turn around. A 36-year-old man named Samuel Slack is an enthusiastic diver. For Samuel, diving was more than simply a pastime. It was a vocation that extended beyond the caves he explored. Daniel Van Sickle, a 37-year-old close friend of Samuel's who lived in Edgewater, is from the town of New Smyrna Beach. It is interesting to note that Crystal provided Daniel and Samuel with a special bond. Samuel's spouse, and they are both employed at New Smyrna Beach's The Garlic Restaurant. Their bond was based on years of shared underwater experiences and went beyond merely their professional relationship. Because one mistake or panic attack could spell the difference between life and death, cave diving requires complete trust between partners. Samuel had an entry-level diving certification, allowing him to explore depths of up to 60 feet underwater, thanks to his novice open water diver card. But Samuel Slack knew more about water than most. His body bore the scars of innumerable dives. His muscles, with little scars, appear to be more suited to the sea than the land. On the other hand, Daniel has demonstrated his advanced level of diving proficiency by successfully obtaining his cave diver certification. Despite having varying degrees of diving experience, Samuel and Daniel made the decision to go on a diving expedition in the Blue Spring waters to discover its underwater treasures and make lifelong memories. On October 9th, 2013, Samuel and Daniel made the decision to dive together as friends. This decision was in keeping with the directives issued by the Florida State Park System's officials to improve divers' general safety. By signing an agreement stating their intention to descend to a maximum depth of 60 feet, the two divers formally accepted their plan. Because of the special features of the cave environment, this set depth is essential. Beyond 60 feet, the underwater cave structure grows steeper and more gloomy, creating more difficulties. Underwater lights are permitted for divers with specific cave or cave certification. Despite being completely suited and ready for their underwater adventure, Samuel was compelled to stay below the 60-foot restriction during their buddy diving expedition since he lacked the necessary certification. Before the dive, Samuel and Daniel put on their diving equipment. Being a certified cave diver, Daniel demonstrated an extra degree of awareness and readiness by adding a regulator, an additional breathing apparatus, to his gear. This safety precaution was meant to give his friend a backup breathing source in case of an emergency during their dive. Both divers also wore dive computers on their wrists, which were useful devices that showed vital information, including their current depth underwater, in addition to tracking and recording their diving progress. The first phases of their dive went without a hitch, with everything going according to plan. Samuel trailed closely behind, keeping eye contact. His gaze was always searching their surroundings. In addition to looking for beauty, he kept an eye out for any indications of environmental instability that would jeopardize their journey, such as minor changes in the color of the water or unexpected rock formations. Their dive strategy was carefully considered, and they practiced emergency procedures in both simulated and real-world scenarios numerous times. They were experts who appreciated the unpredictability of the ocean and never let arrogance get in the way of their meticulous planning. But sometimes, things are not always as they seem. They were halfway through their dive when something changed. Recall that Samuel and Daniel had formally agreed to a diving depth of 60 feet, but once they arrived at the specified depth, an unforeseen development took place. After finishing their underwater research at the depths of the spring, the two guys chose to go deeper than the agreed-upon limit, descending to a considerable depth of 116 feet. During their about 2-minute stay at this depth, they investigated their surroundings. When their problems started to appear, Samuel and Daniels had already begun their ascent towards the water's surface and were about 80 feet below the surface. Samuel began having breathing problems and quickly made a throat slash sign to Daniel to let him know he was having trouble breathing. Daniel's reaction to this one gesture was instantly fueled by adrenaline. Underwater, the panic was not just a feeling. More deadly than any marine animal, it was a silent predator with the potential to kill. The physiological difficulties caused by the water pressure at this depth could turn minor breathing problems or equipment breakdowns into life-threatening situations. In a few seconds, each movement needed to be executed with precise accuracy. Every choice struck a compromise between technical expertise and survival instinct. Their following seconds in the chilly, suffocating silence of the underwater world would decide if their training and skill would prevail over the harsh conditions of the ocean. Given the circumstances, Daniel's reaction was prompt and well practiced. He took off his own regulator and gave Samuel the basic buddy breathing technique that they had been taught in innumerable training sessions. Calm, well-coordinated action was essential for survival. The conversation was not easy. Samuel's desperation was evident. His increasingly erratic actions reflect a growing worry that may be more hazardous than the technical issue itself. It takes more than just oxygen to breathe underwater. It requires complete composure, a deep comprehension of bodily mechanics and mental control, a psychological discipline that distinguishes seasoned divers from beginners. Samuel was losing that crucial conflict. His respiration accelerated and became labored. The rapid consumption of oxygen by each gasping breath threatened to exhaust his finite supply in a matter of minutes. Just a few moments ago, the undersea world, a place of wonder and discovery, had become a cramped survival space. Underwater, survival instincts can be contradictory. The biggest opponent is panic, which can convert reason into a death sentence. Daniel had to act decisively after Samuel refused to return the regulator. His decision to yank the regulator away was motivated by survival instinct rather than aggression. Years of training had equipped him for situations in which saving a life would need brief confrontation. Daniel made a crucial error in his haste to seek help in order to save Samuel. He soared too quickly to the surface. He ascended from an 80-foot depth without following the required decompression stops. It is risky to simply zoom up like an elevator when diving. Because of the high pressure, divers' bodies absorb more nitrogen when they descend far below the surface. Your blood and tissues will produce bubbles of nitrogen climb too quickly. Similar to how carbon dioxide produces bubbles in a shaken Coke can, these nitrogen bubbles are harmful because they can obstruct blood flow, cause joint discomfort, and disrupt your nervous system, leading to decompression sickness. The bends are a painful ailment that can cause catastrophic harm, according to divers. To let your body safely release the stored nitrogen, you should surface slowly and steadily, stopping at various depths. Daniel disregarded all safety precautions because he was so concerned about getting Samuel's aid. His body did not have time to adapt to the shifting forces because of his quick ascension. Tiny bubbles had already begun to develop inside him by the time he reached the surface, laying the groundwork for future health issues such as joint pain, odd nerve sensations, or even more severe consequences. Daniel demanded to be a part of the rescue crew when local emergency personnel showed up. He was aware that his familiarity with the underwater environment and the precise dive site was essential, even though he was in shock and experiencing the first symptoms of possible decompression sickness. After some hesitation, the rescue coordinator realized that Daniel's deep knowledge of the limestone caves might be their greatest advantage. Daniel rapidly re-equipped his motions, which were mechanical, but motivated by a passionate need to comprehend Samuel's fate. Daniel's muscle memory took over as he descended back into the depths of Blue Springs. He navigated the well-known limestone passageways, looking at every nook and cranny and shadow. His command was followed by the rescue crew, whose strong underwater lights pierced the opaque grip of the sea. Every turn was purposeful, and every step was calculated. When Daniel got back to the watery spot, Samuel was still floating. Samuel's body was discovered hanging in the icy, watery solitude. For a brief period, Daniel's professional training struggled with intense emotion. Previously seeming as intriguing formations, the limestone tunnels now felt like uncaring bystanders to a tragedy. Now, recovery is the primary goal. Fastening flotation devices to the body and inflating Samuel's buoyancy vest in preparation for the cautious climb became a mechanical procedure, a last, nearly ceremonial effort to reintegrate him into society. The surface promised no wonders, but Daniel's expert senses already knew the result. The paramedics' motions were synchronized by innumerable training scenarios, and they worked with experienced efficiency. However, some conflicts end before they really start. Among them was Samuel's. With icy, unyielding finality, the ocean had taken its victim. Daniel sat close by, still feeling lightheaded and disoriented from his climb. He was devastated and unable to comprehend what had happened. At the scene, Samuel was declared deceased. Daniel's initial medical challenge was decompression sickness. The hours that followed were crucial. Daniel was promptly ready for emergency hyperbaric therapy, a specialized oxygen treatment that would be able to undo the harm caused by his too swift ascension. A medical recovery effort had replaced the rescue. It took Daniel days to recuperate physically because his own survival was in jeopardy, but the psychological damage he suffered from losing his diving companion would follow him for the rest of his life. Blue Spring resumed its quiet life, delivering 100 million gallons of water every day. Totally unconcerned with the human tragedy that had just transpired inside its depths, Pure Water is unaware of the human tragedy of losing the fragile barrier that separates life from extinction. This dive would live on in Daniel's memory forever as a time when the boundary between professional operational proficiency and disastrous failure became glaringly obvious. The underwater world has not altered. It is still stunning in its intricacy, frightening in its utter apathy, and harsh in its core. We appreciate you watching, and please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. We hope to see you in our upcoming videos.
The Sterkfontein Caves, part of South Africa's cradle of humankind, and it's a force to ultimately reckon with. The caves are renowned for their rich fossil discoveries. This cave offers unparalleled insights into human evolution. Unlike extreme caves like Mexico's Neka Crystal Cave, known for its lethal heat and giant crystals, Sterkfontein's danger lies in its historical significance rather than physical peril. Exploring Sterkfontein risks damaging invaluable fossils, making it more dangerous in terms of irreversible loss to science. While caves like Neka are hostile to humans, Sterkfontein's treasures are fragile and irreplaceable, making their preservation a critical global responsibility. The Sterkfontein Caves, located about 6 miles from Kruger's store and just an hour's drive from Johannesburg, South Africa, are a true treasure. They were opened to the public in 1900 after being discovered sometime between 1896 and 1897. Before that, in 1895, geologist Dr. D. Draper reported finding fossilized bones nearby, but it took many years before people realized the caves had been home to prehistoric humans. Later, similar discoveries were made on a nearby farm called Chrome Dry, leading to the creation of a paleontological reserve in 1946. Today, visiting the Sterkfontein Caves is like stepping into history. Modern walkways and a boardwalk make it easy to explore the site, where world-famous fossils have been uncovered. Tours start above ground, giving visitors a taste of what's to come. Then, they head deep into the caves to uncover secrets of the past. You'll hear stories of how the caves formed, learn about the amazing fossils found there, and even see the stunning stalagmites and stalactites that make the place look like something out of a fantasy world. Sterkfontein is part of the cradle of humankind, a 181 square mile area of bushveld that's a treasure trove of fossils. This region earned its name after a series of surprising events revealed its ancient riches. The magic ingredient here is dolomite, a sedimentary rock that plays a vital role in forming the caves and preserving the artifacts inside. Without dolomite, this incredible window into the past simply wouldn't exist. Exploring the Sterkfontein Caves and the cradle of humankind is like walking through the pages of history. From ancient fossils to the awe-inspiring natural formations, it's a journey back to a time when prehistoric humans roamed the earth. The demand for lime from limestone grew rapidly due to mining, agriculture, and construction projects. Lime became essential for making cement and was widely used in construction. In agriculture, it helped reduce soil acidity, and some farmers even added it to livestock feed to boost calcium levels. Miners relied on lime to neutralize acids used in gold processing. Accessing the lime caves, however, was no easy task. Heavy dynamiting was needed to break through and reveal the hidden entrances. Once opened, these caves turned into scientific gold mines. The Sterkfontein Caves, the largest in the cradle of humankind, stunned the world with remarkable fossil discoveries. These finds helped prove that Africa is the birthplace of humanity. From soil to science, lime played a key role in agriculture, mining, and unearthing ancient secrets. The Sterkfontein Caves stand as a testament to both human ingenuity and the mysteries of our shared origins. The Sterkfontein Caves, owned by the University of the Witwatersrand, are famous for two groundbreaking discoveries. In 1947, Robert Broom and John Robinson found the skull of an Australopithecus, famously known as Mrs. Ples. This find was monumental, but the excitement didn't stop there. In 1992, Philip Tobias and paleoanthropologist Ronald J. Clark uncovered Littlefoot, an almost complete Australopithecus skeleton, over 3 million years old. His discovery added a new chapter to the story of human origins. The exploration of the cradle of humankind took a leap forward in 2008, when Professor Lee Berger of the University of the Witwatersrand used Google Earth to identify more potential cave sites. With a keen eye for detail, Berger spotted clusters of white stinkwood and wild olive trees, which thrive in the limestone-rich soil of the region. This clever observation led to the identification of 500 additional possible cave sites in the cradle. Today, the cradle of humankind boasts over 30 fossil-bearing sites, making it one of the richest areas for early human fossils. More than a third of all known early hominid fossils have been found in the Sterkfontein caves alone. These caves continue to tell the incredible story of humanity's roots, drawing scientists and visitors alike into their depths. From ancient skulls to cutting-edge technology, the Sterkfontein caves prove that our past is as fascinating as it is deep. The Sterkfontein tragedy is a heartbreaking tale of bad luck and mischances that ended in Peter Verl's long, painful ordeal and eventual death. This disaster took place in the awe-inspiring Sterkfontein cave system, a stunning network of underground passages in South Africa. Known for incredible anthropological discoveries, including a 2.3-million-year-old skeleton, this cave system is full of mysteries. Most of it consists of dry areas, but Nuno Gomes had spent the last few months exploring its wet sections, drawn by their challenge and mystery. On September 29th, Nuno led a small, determined group into the cave. His goal was to set a permanent guideline reaching the farthest point of the wet section. His team included Mill Hall, Peter Verl, and Malcolm Keeping. These men had an important job. They would feed the line from the surface and act as surface monitors during the dive. Nuno had already completed this exact dive twice before, so he was confident the plan would go smoothly. The task involved laying the guideline across a stretch of 396 feet. The line began at the Milner Lake entrance, passed through a narrow, challenging squeeze, and ended at a tiny air pocket located at the end of the main tunnel. Once the line was set, Nuno, Peter, and Malcolm decided to follow it recreationally. The dive, while not deep at just 13 feet, offered its own challenges, with its tight spaces and twists. The air pocket they reached was a small, claustrophobic space, just 30 square feet, like a short, narrow hallway, only 3 feet wide and 10 feet long. The men navigated the line carefully, weaving through the Swiss cheese-like structure of the cave. Eventually, they surfaced in the tiny air pocket, one after the other. For a brief, magical moment, they shared a sense of wonder. They realized they might be the first humans ever to stand there, in a space untouched for millions of years. The thought was thrilling, giving them the feeling of being true explorers. They imagined what treasures or ancient remains might lie hidden in those dark, mysterious passages. This was the last time the three men would talk together. Their excitement was short-lived as they turned to head back to the Milner Lake area, planning to retrace their steps along the guideline. Nuno led the way confidently, with Peter and Malcolm following closely behind. The tunnel was shallow, and the guideline provided a straightforward path to the exit. As they swam, Nuno suddenly felt a sharp tug on his fin. Malcolm signaled to him urgently. Peter was no longer with them. Concerned, Nuno turned back to look. For a few tense moments, he scanned the surrounding darkness, then caught sight of a faint beam of light. Peter's flashlight was glowing faintly in one of the many side tunnels. Nuno's initial reaction was irritation, but he understood. The urge to explore, to peek into the unknown, was powerful. The side passages were tempting, their dark openings beckoning with the promise of discovery. Nuno signaled to Peter, urging him to return to the guideline. Reluctantly, Peter rejoined them, and the group continued their journey. As they neared the tight squeeze leading to the exit, Peter disappeared again. This time, it was more worrying. After a quick, fruitless search, Nuno and Malcolm decided to leave the tunnel and emerged in the open Milner Lake room, now unsure of Peter's fate. Every moment in this dark, silent cave felt heavy with tension and regret. The Sterkfontein tragedy was unfolding with every small decision, and the consequences were about to grow more devastating. Nuno and Malcolm were growing increasingly anxious as they tried to figure out where Peter had gone. They hoped he might have taken another exit tunnel, but there was no sign of him. With no other option, they turned back and re-entered the dark, murky tunnel, following the guide rope. Nuno decided to venture off the line into side tunnels he was familiar with, hoping to spot Peter's flashlight. But this time, there was no light, no movement, nothing but silent, cold water and endless darkness. For the next 4 exhausting hours, Nuno and Malcolm scoured the main tunnel and the surrounding areas near Milner Lake, swimming back and forth, hoping to find some clue. The effort stirred up silt, making the already dim visibility worse. With each dive, the water turned more like a muddy soup than a clear path. Though the situation was grim, they kept up hope, believing Peter might have found one of the small air pockets scattered throughout the side passages. Surely he was waiting it out, catching his breath and planning his next move. They just needed to find the right air pocket before it was too late. As the hours passed and their air tanks emptied, Nuno and Malcolm were forced to call for help. In the late afternoon, the fire brigade divers arrived, but the cave's complexity and the lack of specialized training kept them from entering. It was frustrating, but they couldn't take any risks. Nuno reached out to Craig Stevenson, a fellow diver who knew the tunnels well. With fresh air tanks, Craig and Nuno dived back in, determined to find Peter. By evening, police divers joined the search, but the odds were worsening. Nuno and Malcolm, now completely drained and shivering from the cold, had to step back. Hypothermia was setting in, and their bodies couldn't take much more. Meanwhile, the stirred-up silt made visibility almost zero. The water had become so clouded, it felt like swimming through wet concrete. The police eventually called off the search for the night. It was a gut-wrenching decision. They were now convinced this wasn't a rescue mission anymore. It was a body recovery. The hope that Peter might be alive was slipping away. Peter had been excited earlier that day, thrilled by the unknown possibilities the cave offered. As the three men began their return trip after setting the guideline, Peter couldn't resist exploring. The allure of the unexplored was too strong. Just a quick peek, he thought. He turned into one of the large side tunnels, shining his flashlight to see what might lie beyond. When Nuno grabbed his fin to pull him back, Peter knew it was the right thing to do. Safety first. Still, the excitement of standing in a cave that could have housed ancient life was too tempting. The walls themselves seemed alive with history and secrets. What might be just beyond? What if he missed out on a once-in-a-lifetime discovery? But the cave had no mercy. It was a labyrinth of narrow, twisting passages, each darker and more disorienting than the last. Without an additional guideline to anchor him to safety, Peter ventured too far. The dim beam of his flashlight cut through the blackness, but it only illuminated tiny slices of the cave at a time. Every turn looked the same, every passage held the same promise, and the same danger. Peter turned again, following another tunnel. The intricate formations in the cave created a maze-like effect, and navigating in the dark, water-filled environment became almost impossible. Unlike a casual stroll through a familiar street, these paths didn't offer landmarks or signs. Each twist and turn blurred together in the dark void. The challenge wasn't just physical, but also mental. In a cave, three-dimensional orientation is a cruel trick. Up, down, left, and right all feel the same when your light only shows you a few feet ahead. And so, Peter disappeared into the depths. His adventurous spirit had carried him away, but the cave's unforgiving nature swallowed him whole. Nuno and Malcolm's desperate search, the arrival of backup divers, and even the police couldn't break through the cave's cold grip. The tragedy was slowly unfolding, and the worst was yet to come. Peter was lost, and nothing looked right. Every turn in the narrow tunnels seemed like the last, but they weren't. His movement stirred up the silty walls, making the water murky. Visibility went from bad to, where's the flashlight even pointing? After trying what felt like every possible path, he finally spotted the silvery shimmer of water above him. With a push, he broke through into a tiny, hidden air pocket. It was a one-of-a-kind find, but it wasn't exactly the grand prize he had hoped for. Relief hit him first. Air. Then came a strange mix of thrill and unease. He was the first person to see this cramped, secret space, which would have been exciting under different circumstances. For now, though, it was his unplanned waiting room. With no way to locate the guideline in the clouded water below, Peter decided to stay put and hope his friends, Nuno and Malcolm, would come looking. As he scanned the small room with his flashlight, Peter noticed a few tight passages branching off in different directions. They called out to the explorer in him, promising mystery and adventure, but the logical side of him, thankfully still functioning, told him now wasn't the time for spelunking. He pointed his flashlight into the water, hoping the beam would act as a signal if his friends passed by. The excitement of discovery quickly wore off, leaving him alone with silence, darkness, and his thoughts. Peter's flashlight battery had just 30 minutes of life left, so he turned it off, preserving every bit of energy he could. The room felt eerie without light, just a hollow, air-filled pocket of loneliness. With no clear path out, Peter had to follow the golden rule of diving. When in doubt, sit tight. He tried everything he could think of to get attention. Banging his tank on the walls made dull thuds that went nowhere. Flashes of his light into the water didn't draw anyone, and his voice didn't stand a chance against the heavy silence of the cave. Adrenaline had kept him going at first, but it eventually drained, leaving him exhausted. He finally dozed off, the pitch-black void swallowing him into an uneasy sleep. When Peter woke, he had no idea how much time had passed. 10 minutes? 10 hours? The darkness gave him no clues. With his flashlight battery almost dead and no food, his options shrank to just one: sit and wait. The air was plentiful, and the water in the cave could keep him hydrated, so he wasn't in immediate danger. Still, the isolation gnawed at him. He couldn't help but think his friends might assume he had drowned. That thought was worse than the darkness. Peter knew the exit was close. If he could just figure out the right path, he had enough air to make it out. But every tunnel looked the same, and the chance of getting lost again was too high. For now, Peter could do nothing but wait, trapped between the hope of rescue and the fear of being left behind. Time ticked away slowly in the small, suffocating room, the once thrilling cave now a silent, inescapable prison. Waiting was all Peter could do, and it wasn't exactly a thrilling activity. His only hope was that someone out there was still looking for him. Unfortunately, after the first night of searching, the police locked the caves down, banning anyone from diving or exploring until they were ready to recover what they assumed was a lifeless body. The tunnels were a mess, full of stirred-up silt that would take days to settle. The authorities didn't return for an entire week, convinced there was no urgency. When they finally showed up, they spent just one day scanning the pathways, poking into unexplored tunnels, and finding absolutely no trace of Peter. Another weekend passed, and the police made another half-hearted attempt. This time, they kept civilians out of the caves entirely. That didn't sit well with Nuno, who was furious they hadn't asked experienced divers for help. Determined to do something, he plotted ways to sneak in and search for Peter himself. Little did he know, Peter was still alive, clinging to hope, and waging a battle against time and his own body. As days turned into weeks, Peter must have realized that rescue wasn't coming anytime soon. Trapped in total darkness and unbearable silence, he was left with only his thoughts and the faint hope that someone would find his tiny air pocket. Hunger gnawed at him like an unrelenting monster. With his flashlight long dead, he occasionally crawled to the edges of the room, feeling his way through the suffocating blackness. Once, he followed a path about 120 feet from the water's edge, only to hit a dead end. Disappointed and drained, he returned to his watery prison, too weak to try again. Peter's reality had become a nightmare of endless isolation. Studies suggest that even a few hours of complete silence and darkness can make someone lose their grip on reality. Peter endured this torment for weeks. His mind was likely playing tricks on him, and hallucinations may have been his only company. His body, deprived of food, was wasting away, feeding on its own muscles just to survive. Starvation is brutal enough, but combine it with the sensory deprivation and loneliness Peter faced, and it's hard to imagine a worse kind of suffering. In this pitch-black void, Peter had no way to measure time. The only clue might have been the growth of his beard, which had become noticeably longer. It was a grim, almost mocking reminder of how long he had been stuck in this living tomb. Without food, his body had no energy for activity, so he spent most of his time sleeping, unaware if it was day or night. His biology was shutting down, little by little, like a clock winding to its final tick. Peter's weight plummeted as he starved, shedding 44 pounds during his weeks of torment. The physical and mental toll was staggering. Every hour stretched into an eternity, and the hopelessness was crushing. He was too weak to signal for help, and too trapped to make another attempt at escape. Lying next to the water, Peter's body was giving up, even if a flicker of hope still clung to the idea that someone might dive into the cave and pull him out of this nightmare. Peter's rescue wasn't going to come from the divers. It was the dry cavers who would find him. For 6 long weeks, the police kept diving, weekend after weekend, but they had no luck. When the search finally ended, they reopened the dry caves, but kept the underwater sections off limits to divers. As soon as the dry caves were accessible, the local Speleological Association, a group of passionate cave explorers, jumped into action. Led by Roger Ellis, they started searching for a connection between the dry caves and the underwater tunnels. Nuno, still determined to help, joined them. After just a few hours of searching, Nuno made an amazing discovery. He found a breakthrough section that connected the dry caves to the water-filled tunnels. This was groundbreaking and gave everyone hope. It confirmed for the first time that the dry caves and underwater systems were linked. Other volunteers made another surprising find, a set of footprints leading to a dead end of solid rock. The excitement in the air was palpable, and it fueled everyone's determination to find Peter. Roger Ellis continued his exploration and came across a new water connection. There, lying next to the water's edge, he found Peter's emaciated body. It was a heartbreaking sight. Peter hadn't drowned as everyone had assumed. Incredibly, he had survived for an astonishing 3 to 4 weeks before succumbing to starvation. His face was covered with a beard that had grown during his time trapped, and he had lost over 40 pounds. Nearby, his air tank was still nearly full, a haunting reminder of how close he was to survival. Next to Peter's body, the rescuers found a simple yet gut-wrenching message scratched into the surface. "I love you, Cheryl and Ma." It was clear that Peter had fought hard to survive, holding on to life until his body could no longer take it. His situation had been nothing short of a nightmare, and despite dozens of divers searching the cave, he had no way to signal for help. One diver had surfaced in a nearby opening just 100 feet from Peter's location. If Peter had been able to shout or make a noise loud enough, maybe, just maybe, he could have been heard in the connected tunnels. The thought haunted everyone involved. If the dry caves had been left open from the start, Peter could have been found alive within a single day. The series of what-ifs left a painful mark on everyone who had been part of the search. Peter's autopsy confirmed he had died of starvation after more than 3 agonizing weeks alone in the dark. The news hit Nuno particularly hard. He had done everything he could to save Peter, yet the outcome was still so tragic. Despite this devastating loss, Nuno continued his diving career and achieved several remarkable records. He also wrote a book that chronicled his many diving experiences, including the heartbreaking story of Peter and the caves of Sterkfontein. It became a testament to the challenges and dangers of the underwater world, as well as the resilience of the human spirit, even in the face of unimaginable odds.